Back and we back and we back. Yeah, man. We have people calling your phone, trying to be a busy teens mind. Busy teens mind, man. What up, IG? I really need to start getting on the tube, you know what I'm saying? Start getting on YouTube a little bit more. I plan on having a quick conversation, like not right now, but there's some things I got coming y'all way though, right? We gonna explore the history of race baiting. You feel me? I'm sure all y'all done heard the term before. You know what I'm saying? If y'all be in my comment sections, I'm sure y'all done seen it before, right? So we're going to explore the term race baiting, who coined it, all that shit, right? Boom. Then we're going to jump in as well into, I'm putting together right now a little mini curriculum that I'm going to be doing on YouTube about critical race theory. Like, I feel like a lot of people don't know what the hell they talking about when they bring up critical race theory. And I just happen to be somebody that debated with critical race theory when I was in college. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to get there too. And then I got this social work book I got. And I think it's a few little chapters I would like to get into in terms of social work, because we know a lot of people be talking about doing this and doing that. So, alternative. Hey, can I DM you about something considering Black community health? Yes, you can. Definitely you can. Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Cow and Chicken, Iron Weasel, One Gotta Go. One of the last two, you pick. Yeah. Definitely. But yeah, man, we're about to jump in back in this conversation about reparations off. Shout out to you more. We probably went to University of Oklahoma at the same time, man.
Oh, hello.
Hey, Carol, I'm definitely still gonna be posting stuff about Palestine. You know what I'm saying? I'm still posting stuff about Palestine. As a matter of fact, me and my homeboy Eric McLovin is supposed to be having this a conversation about Palestine from an actual, person that's I feel like that has the perspective, that grew up in the culture, that grew up with the identity, you feel me, from that perspective. I think that it's been a lot of non-Jewish, non-Palestinian, non-Israel people, talking about what's going on. So we definitely gonna be having a conversation concerning Palestine from a Palestinian, you feel me? And if y'all, and shout out to my Palestinian followers, if y'all want to be a part of this conversation, definitely hit me on the email. The email gonna be the best way to hit me up, not the DMs. I'm right now coming up with me better practices of getting into the DMs. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, email.
I can
What was you
share.
saying though?
I can share your personal number with everyone if that's helpful.
Nah, I don't do that at all, man. I've been having that number for a while, man. I would hate to have to change it, man.
But okay, I'm glad we're back. I don't know what happened, internet connection, something, but I'm glad we're back to chat reparations. So I think where we left off, there were some comments that in the chat around people not liking the comparisons between the Holocaust and slavery. So I wanted to pick that up because I think that's a really interesting conversation for anyone who's joining now. We were just talking about how reparations aren't a new concept and how victims of the Holocaust and their families have been given different forms of reparations in the past. And so why is it not the same for the descendants or victims of enslaved people? And I have my theories about it. And I think there was that comment that said, I don't like the comparisons between atrocities, but why not? Right? I think it's one thing to have a discussion and say, oh, well, this one was worse than another. Right, but that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is there's a historical event that was an atrocity that certain governments recognized, and although it will never be able to replace the lives lost, made a financial commitment to at least atone for that atrocity.
Yeah.
But that hasn't happened for other historical atrocities. So I don't think it's a problem to compare the two if it's for evidence as to why this is the status quo and why it should happen again.
This is what I say. This is what I say right here. You feel me? I'm gonna start this by saying free Palestine, right? And the reason why I'm saying
Oh yeah, this is a timely conversation.
Why I'm saying free Palestine though. You already see how I'm linking this here, right? The
Yeah.
reason why I'm saying free Palestine is because in the conversation of talking about reparations, we have to be careful of not creating, I feel like, a Palestinian erasure or creating a narrative that justifies the colonialization of Palestine because it was a form of reparation. You know what I'm saying? But I think that in terms of me reading about Afro pessimism, me reading about anti-blackness specifically, I think that if you get into the literature, shout out to Dr. Frank Wooderson, he does have an analysis where he compares the African Holocaust to the Jewish Holocaust, and he's talking about in terms of making an analysis about anti-blackness and about how the world was able to buy in, like how the world was able to buy into black equaling slave, and that because black equals slave, it had no heritage, had no land, had no language, had no history, and how during the Holocaust, the entire world isn't buying into the dehumanization of, Jewish people were there, but where globally they still have a language, a culture, a heritage, and eventually are given a piece of land in turn, or I say colonize a piece of land that is justified, through not through my eyes, through world eyes, in terms of saying that you had this piece of land. But I think that because we're having a complex conversation, we got to be real careful of not sliding into, you feel me, no anti-Semitism or sliding into Islamophobia or sliding into, not accusing you of nothing, but this saying
no, of course.
To be all conscious of it. You feel me?
Of course. I always want to create safe spaces, and a conversation about Israel and Palestine would have to be dedicated to that, because I don't want to start mixing issues. But the point is, whether or not when we're talking about the Holocaust as a historical event, I would argue that the reason why reparations were not as questioned or not seen as problematic as it was with the transatlantic slave trade is because of the color of the skin of people who were victims of the Holocaust. Why else would we have?
I don't see the productivity of saying why we think one got it than the other. You feel me? Because I know that there's just a whole bunch of stuff tied into it. You know what I'm saying?
If we can't unpack the problem and fully understand it, how will we ever solve it? Because if we can't look at how we were able to enact, or I don't want to say successfully, but if we were able to successfully get reparations for one atrocity, but not for another, we have to be able to take the lessons learned from the ones that we were able to get and figure out why. And so if the issue is skin color, that means that's a problem we have to tackle for people to start realizing that the reparations that are required for the transatlantic slave trade is based off of a change of perception. So I'm not necessarily saying that, I'm all about, everything that I do is all about learning from the past so that we can move forward. And so if we're trying to figure out why reparations haven't happened yet, I think there's a couple of reasons. I think one is because of the skin color of the people who are asking for the reparations. But I think two is this conversation that we started to have. And I think it's the conversation that we started to have, which is, do people view reparations as a debt that's owed, or do people view reparations as a handout? Because if you view it as a debt that's owed, right, which will be in the small majority of non-black people, then there's no reason why we can't get reparations, because no one likes to be in debt. But if you view it as a handout, which I would posit most of Americans do, that's where then we run into the issues. And so I would love to hear people's comments around what are their hesitations for reparations, because when you look at what reparations are, there can be so many different versions of it, right? It could be housing credit.
I think that the distinction is not about is not around how the debt is seen, but I think the distinction is how the violence to the body is seen. And I think that's what I was talking about in terms of, that's what I was talking about in terms of anti-blackness. Is that the thing that we know, I think there are three tenets that I know from reading that's unique to, you feel me, the enslaved African experience in the Western world. Prenatal alienation, prenatal alienation, social death, you know what I'm saying? And complete dishonor. You know what I'm saying? And I think that those three things make it where black people are always already seen as being socially dead. Therefore, what happens to us, it's like 2 + 2 is 4, the sky's blue, and niggas supposed to be dead. You know what I'm saying? Niggas supposed to be enslaved. So when Frank Wooderson and them was talking about black equals slave, they talking about how through the Middle Passage, black people, we literally became known as black people. You know what I'm saying? We literally were Africans, and we went from being seen as Africans to black people, and that is the social death that the entire world bought into and made it where we can have the triangular trade and we can sell black bodies from that coast to this coast to that coast to that coast. And I think that is the distinction of why the reparations hasn't been, is that because of the humanity of the people that's happening to, we don't have any. Almost in my
Yeah.
mind, I'm making a humanist critique and say that the world's understanding of humanitarian and what it means to be human is structured in opposition to what it means to be black.
Yeah.
And I think that
Yeah.
even when you think about UN, international, when we have humanitarian crimes and shit like that or whatever, we know that there are certain zones in the world that are always already seen as being exposable and disposable. And I think that ties back into slavery, because it's
Yeah.
literally where we're going to create a continent that's being the standing reserve for the rest of the world. Like, we believe that capitalism is the best thing smoking, and goddamn it, you have to have workers. Well, around that equator,
Well,
we happen to have, that's how they happen like that. But you know,
so I think it's interesting because we're saying the same thing around sort of anti-blackness overpowers reason when it comes to this conversation of reparations. And that's exactly what I was saying around the Holocaust as why reparations were granted versus not. I mean, there are other reasons as well, right? So, you know, some people will argue, oh, well, the Holocaust is more recent, right? But when you look at the actual impact, the generational impact of enslaved people and the transatlantic slave trade, it far outweighs it. And that's probably an argument that people make, is that, oh, well, it would be too expensive.
yeah,
But when there was another comment that people were talking about, which is, you know, it happened so long ago, right? When do we move on from it? And I think the reality that people have to realize is that every day as a black person, you walk out into the world, you exist, you are a survivor of what's happened before. You are your ancestors who went through all of that struggle, and that struggle and pain still exists now, just in different forms. Racial trauma is a well-researched
yeah,
phenomenon, and we have to recognize that every time a black person is accosted in a store and asked to show their receipt when no one else is, that is a form of trauma that exists for a specific community that is tied back to the transatlantic slave trade. So we need to stop thinking, oh, well, that was so long ago and the effects aren't happening now. The effects are still happening now. And as we were
yeah,
talking about in the first half of
definitely,
this,
definitely.
we have to realize that the generational and economic impact, the racial wealth gap is huge. And it's because of the transatlantic slave trade and because of anti-blackness. And you brought up something I wanted to ask, because I want to get your take on, because I see all these funny memes around capitalism, right? And there's all these reels or TikToks where immigrants will be like, you know, fuck capitalism, but my parents didn't send me here to be poor. But my question for you is, I have my own thoughts, but I want to ask you first. Do you think capitalism is inherently anti-black?
Definitely,
Okay.
1000%. As a
Well,
matter of
that
fact,
was next
as a matter of
topic.
fact, I got all my. I'll be willing to put every asset that I have and ever will own to
Yeah.
whoop somebody ass on how capitalism is structured by anti-blackness, and how if you don't have anti-blackness, you do not have capitalism as we know it. Like, capitalism, like what? Yeah, definitely. I'm going with that all the way, 1000%.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was easy. I mean, the thing is that people don't always realize that, though. People don't always realize, and it's not just anti-black, right? It's majority anti-black, but it's also sexist. It's also homophobic. Capitalism as a whole is a structure that is embedded with white supremacy. So
Yeah,
I
today
always
white
talk about,
supremacy, but I'll be willing to make a structural analysis about
yeah,
how, like, singularity in terms of anti-blackness, the system of anti-blackness, how we're able to show how it is structured through and through by that. You feel me? And I think the system,
100%.
they use all these different isms as tools. You feel me?
Yeah.
The
They're
ableism,
all rooted. They're
racism.
all
You know what I'm
rooted in the
saying?
same. Yeah, exactly. They're all rooted in the same thing. And I think there was a comment earlier in the last half, which was really important, is that it's not focusing on the communities that have been marginalized. It's focusing on the root cause. The root cause of sexism, homophobia, racism is that white supremacy, and that's what we have to unpack. And what people don't realize, and I'm always trying to educate them, especially with business, is that white supremacy isn't just the Klan. It isn't just blackface. It isn't just the overt examples. White supremacy could be those people who say, "Oh, I only vote based on economic issues." That's a form. That's a form of white supremacy. White supremacy is the system that protects white privilege. That's it. That's its simplest definition. So
I think, and too, from having this conversation, because I feel like I've been reading debate stuff lately. I'm getting back into, you know what I'm saying, my debate
yeah,
mind in terms of debates. Like, it's off season right now. You feel my debate coach as well. But now I get the rhetorical criticisms of talking about white supremacy and how it centers whiteness and white people, and while sometimes we have to use the language of blackness, anti-blackness, in terms of centering what we're talking about. because I can see how sometimes what I want to say, the way people can abstract from the conversation allows for it to deviate when you start talking about white supremacy. But I feel like we have a better control framing when we're trying to center blackness. You know what
So
I'm saying?
I hear you and I understand that.
I can see that. I can see
And
that
I
now. We
think
having this
and I
conversation though.
and I think I partially agree, but
Yeah.
here's where I'm challenged by it.
Yeah.
So I agree that it's almost like marketing, right? It's got a stronger marketing appeal when you're like, oh, this is anti-black. People are like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a problematic, anti-something. But the problem is that we then start getting into all these arguments where we can't come together. So when we get into Stop Asian Hate and we get into Black Lives Matter and we get into ableist microaggressions or we get into sexism, we start fracturing. And I almost feel like when we start fracturing all of these movements, they don't pick up momentum. But when we focus it on the real issue at hand, which is there's one at the core of it, white supremacy, then I feel like we get the momentum and the power from all these individual groups. So that's my only challenge, is that I fear that when we get into these moments of Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, can they work together? Are they different? Like, we need to focus on the real problem and stop attacking each other and focus on the fact that it's white supremacy at the core of it all. And we need to change the perception of white supremacy so that people don't. The reason why we have to start changing the language of anti-black, anti-woman is because people think white supremacy is only the Klan, and we have to change that
But when I
mindset.
say anti-blackness, I'm not just throwing the word anti in front of black and running with it. Like, I'm talking about there's a whole literature base dedicated to the
Oh no,
studies of anti-blackness,
I
as
get
well
that,
as how anti-blackness is tied into everything you just talked about. Stop
and
Asian hate,
what's
Me Too
yeah,
movement, all that. Where
that's
it's
what's
talking
important.
about that from a linguistic standpoint,
Yeah.
centering blackness is a better way to move and mobilize, because we see that at the core of all these different communities, that there is a hierarchy of light over dark, white over black. Whether we're talking about the LGBT community, whether we're talking about that indigenous community or that indigenous
Yeah.
community, whether we're talking about, you feel me, the feminist movement, what its core and
So
all
my
these things
question,
is anti-blackness. And I think that is the better way to talk about it, because it makes it where we're centering who is being acted upon and not the actors in
see,
terms of the status quo. But the
that's the
status
difference.
quo makes it where we always talk about the actors. We never
But
talk about who is acted upon.
my question is, I have two questions. One is, why aren't we focusing on the actors, because that's who needs to change the behavior? And two, I mean, of course I'm against anti-blackness. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously. But my question is, when it comes to intersectionality, right, and inclusivity, how does anti-blackness tie to the fact that indigenous peoples, especially in America and elsewhere, are the victims of colonialism as well? They're, in the eyes of the world, not technically seen as black. So when we talk about anti-blackness, I worry that people then don't think about the other groups as well
Yeah, I can dig
that
that.
are impacted.
Yeah. The to the first question, to the first answer, the
Yeah.
reason why it is better and a better tool to talk about anti-blackness and not the actors is because the status quo is what makes all the impacts we're talking about happen, right? The status quo, the way that the world is structured, is the reason, and part what I'm debating is the structure of the world is the reason why we had these impacts in the structural violence, because of the structure of the world. So when we
Yeah.
talk about we should focus on the actors, that is the status quo. I think that in order for us to deconstruct the status quo, we have to be able to produce something that is unique, that can make it where we can part and parcel move away from that. I think it's an ableist type of term to say it now, but I would want to say, you feel me, that when you do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, you feel me, that's insanity. I've learned that is now, you feel me, you know what I'm saying, ableist. So I would say now, you feel me, when we want to move strategic, we should not keep on using the same type of tools and methods that the status quo is always already used to co-opting. So I think it
I
is better in terms of uniqueness. Because think about it right now, as a content curator, once I start talking about anti-blackness, even if you think that I'm only talking about taking the word anti and throwing it in front of black, you still have to ask me more questions and get the framing from me, and you don't get to use all of those old bullshit ass pathological tropes about white supremacy and blacks. You see what I'm saying? In terms of debate, you now have to ask me questions about what I mean in terms of anti-blackness. And that's what's
I
the
think I,
uniqueness of not focusing on the actor and focusing on the acted, because that's really what
yeah,
international relations is.
I mean,
International relations is where we only focus on crime and violence in the world based off of nation states and how governments act upon people. I think that always creates it where black people, to me, the analysis I'm making is that analysis make it where black people are always already either A, or get the back burner of the analysis, or B, or just not accounted for. And that's
so
what
I
I was
think,
talking about in terms of humanitarianism, and that's what I was talking about in terms of the UN being like, that's a humanitarian crime, but us fucking over the Congo, that's not a humanitarian crime.
so I
That's a
think,
humanitarian crime. And I think that's how I'm thinking about it.
I think I would agree if, but I think the premise of that is that we've been doing the same thing over and over again, and that's why I think I disagree. I don't think the approach that we've been taking over the last few decades, critical race theory has come to the fore now as something that people are starting to pay more attention to and respect. But I think over the last few centuries and decades, we haven't actually taken it to white supremacy in the way that I think we can because we're focusing on the wrong issues. So I think I agree with the idea of the
Yeah, but
reframing of it, but I
anti-blackness
don't
makes
think
white
we
supremacy possible. You see what I'm saying? Like
a
literally,
hundred
the
percent.
opposition to blackness and black people is what makes possible white supremacy as being a mobilizing institution. You see
But
what I'm saying?
does anti-blackness account for the fact that the majority of white women voted for Trump, even though it was against their best
Yeah.
interests?
As a matter of fact, I would argue that anti-blackness is the better analysis for us to understand why white women voted for Donald Trump and not white supremacy. I think that I'm talking about, if you go to what I'm talking about in terms of Dr. Celia Hartman, Dr. Jared Sexton, Dr. Frank Woodison, all these people, they literally have 20, 30 years of literature talking about how anti-blackness is cornered, part and parcel a part of settler colonialism, and how when we talk about anti-blackness, the clearing of the land is a part of the building empire that our people was, you know what I'm saying, that it is built on. You feel what I'm saying? So
I
when we want
think,
to talk about sexism, ableism, transphobia, any of that, I like literally I'm trained to be able to do it through an analysis of anti-blackness, of being
I think
able
that,
to think about how blackness and black people are positioned and how we're talking about, and being able to already understand there's going to be a default hierarchy of white over black, light over dark, even when you want to talk about anything you want to talk about.
yeah, I think for me, it's sort of it's a marketing question of, I find it easier to talk about dismantling white supremacy than I find it to talk about stop Asian hate, Black Lives Matter, stop ableist
Yeah,
language.
yeah,
It's
but stop,
easier,
but
but I think we're saying the same thing. It's
anti-blackness
just
is
about
not a
how we're
chain
doing it.
equivalency. But anti-blackness is not a chain equivalency to stop Asian hate. You feel me? Like anti-blackness is literally like structural to the world. You see what I'm saying? White
Yeah,
over black, light over dark. That is the world is
a
structured that way.
hundred, 100%. But I think when we get to talking about identities that aren't physical, sexuality, gender, neurodiversity, ability,
Yeah, anti-blackness is human.
I think that's where we lose people though, as far as accounts for it. But when you hear the term anti-blackness at first, you don't automatically jump to, oh, well, that is inclusive of gender and sexuality. And I think dismantling
And
white
that
supremacy does a better
and
job.
that's what we call being anti-black. But that's the reason though. You feel me? I would
Hmm.
say like I'm supposed to be like, that's anti-black though, because when we
Interesting.
start thinking about other things, we don't
Yeah,
think about how black people are always already a part of whatever we're talking about. That is
yeah,
why we have to center anti-blackness, just because anti-blackness is literally just centering yourself away from blackness or black people. You see what I'm saying? So when we're talking about neurology, when we're talking about disability, there's no reason why we can't ground that conversation in terms of
yeah. I don't know if
anti-blackness and black people,
I
or
don't
black
know
and
if
blackness, and we can do it
I don't
in
know if
terms of white supremacy. It's like
I don't know
we
if I
have to be able to
trust
do it that way.
I don't know if I trust people enough to make that connection. But what I want to do
We
is,
shouldn't though. We shouldn't though. And I think that what you're acknowledging is that what anti-blackness gets at is that when it comes to the gratuitous violence that black people have, there's a
yeah,
grammar of suffering that we can't use with language to speak to the violence that black people has. So when it comes to talking about marketability, what you're getting at is that the way that we talk about black violence is not consumable in a way that makes it where the grammars of suffering that we're using when we talk about anti-blackness, a way that it can be literally made intelligible. That's literally what the literature is about, what you're talking about right now. Like everything, like all of your pushbacks, it's in the literature. It's like literally to me, my mind blown right now because I'm seeing how great the literature is.
What I challenge is not the literature. That's fine, and I'm sure it accounts for it. Yeah. But what I'm talking about is the real world interactions that I have with people and the conversations. People aren't focusing on literature. So when we talk about, oh, it's a marketing thing and what's consumable, that is what I'm focused on. I'm focused on how do I make this digestible for people to actually take action. So for instance, when we're having this conversation about reparations, let's close it by saying, what are actionable things people listening right now could do when it comes to reparations? Because we could talk about theory all day long, but that's not going to move the needle.
I think is learn about the totality of reparations and what it accounts for. You feel me?
But see, I don't know if that's I don't know if I would say that's the most actionable thing, because I would assume most people joining this call follow one of us. They're with the vibes. They want to be an ally. They get it. Right? They can read as many articles and books as they have time for, which they don't. But what's an actionable thing that they can do? Right? Donating to organizations working for social justice on a monthly basis. Right? Not just making it a tick buck item, but constantly putting your money where your mouth is. That's one example. But what are other ways could we ideate for people? Let's say there's a white person or a non-black person trying to
right now, because I'm thinking more structural.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm thinking more structural, so I'm thinking.
And I think that's why I say that for the past few decades we haven't been actually challenging the status quo, because it's so easy for us to talk about institutionalized racism and structural racism and the structures, but then we don't actually talk about how does it look for Joe Schmo to actually enact it in the middle of nowhere. How does he actually become an ally? How does he actually petition for reparations? Because we could talk about structural all day long, but at the end of the day, the structures and the institutions are run by the very people that we're trying to dismantle, right? Old, pale, stale, etc. So I don't know how much talking about the institutions is going to do anything.
I feel like this is where we disagree at. I see it as a sequencing. You feel me? I think that you see it as a first individualistic, then structure. I see it as the structure and the system is what makes people act.
And that's why
I'm thinking about it from a legislation policy standpoint, that it's still practical.
Exactly.
It's still practical. We're able to curate legislation and policy and get funds for research. That's what we started the conversation with about. With you being able to quantify a dollar amount onto the reparations, because there are people that are doing studies and research around
when did slavery
white supremacy is like, even white supremacy started from
when did slavery end? When did slavery end? Transatlantic slave trade. When did trade? Yeah.
The United States federal government say that the United States says slavery shall be prohibited except for punishment, conviction of crime.
I know, and we could talk about 13th, and I think that's a whole other analysis. What I'm basically trying to say is that,
and there's no way to demarcate when it stopped, because white folks break the laws all the time.
100%. What I was trying to say is, we've been trying the institutional legislation thing for centuries, and it hasn't worked. And I don't have faith in the system. Hold on. But I don't have faith in the systems that can't even call domestic terrorism. I'm referring to the 6th of Jan. I don't have faith in a system that can't even call that what it is, to then actually, I'm here in the UK where they just released a report that said institutionalized racism basically doesn't exist. So I don't have faith in the institutions of the UK or the US who are benefiting off of colonialism still to this day to dismantle themselves. So that's why I focus my efforts on
No, it's
what can
not this.
individual people do
You
in
wasn't
their
being.
own lives.
It was an individual person, individual people that made the decision for the entire system to say that the UK does not acknowledge systemic racism. There were individuals that made that decision.
The UK,
Literally, you feel me?
the day the UK
So I
admits
don't see
that
the point in
institutionalized
putting faith in individuals if we're acknowledging that individuals is already what's not. You know what I'm saying?
because individuals make up society. That's who we are. Society isn't
I
this
see it that,
third
but like
party group. We
I
are
see it that
society.
individuals, structures got to be like, you know what I'm saying? You got to
Nah,
recognize that.
I don't trust the same structures that can't call.
I don't trust them. That's the reason why I'm giving a structural analysis
But
because
I trust
because
people.
what you allow. Because to me, I think that focusing on individuals allow for scapegoat mentality to happen. That it says
No,
that
I think it's
no,
the
George, no,
opposite.
Kimmy, it's not what you
No,
said.
no, no.
You see what I'm
No,
saying? And
I think
that's
it's
the
the
reason
opposite.
why you have to
I think
acknowledge
saying
the individuals in the system
no,
with
no,
a
no.
structural analysis.
That's where we
The
disagree.
structures.
I think when we say, oh, institutionalized racism, structural, we get to blame somebody else. But I think when we
Nah,
bring it to the individual and we say, what are
yeah,
you
nah,
doing? How has your life changed?
nah.
That's when
That's
people
not
say,
fair.
oh shit. I think when we make it individual, that's when people realize, oh shit, how has my year changed? Because I think it's so easy for people to say, oh, that's the government's job, or that's, and I want to tell people, okay, what can you do for reparations? How can you do reparations in your life? Now, it's a spectrum, right? You
Yeah.
can write your politicians, you could donate money, but hell, I would argue that sharing your Netflix password with your black friend is a form of reparations. So
It is.
I want to get people individually acting and not saying, oh well, it's government's jobs, because I don't trust any government who can't say systemic racism is a problem to fix systemic racism.
Given a
Mic
structural
drop.
analysis does not say that
All
we
your
trust the
stru- but
government.
all
Hold
your
on, because
structural
this
analysis.
is very, very important though.
All right, let me hear you. Let
Because
me hear
you're
you.
conflating institutions with structures. Those two things are not the same. When I say
Tell me the difference.
structural analysis, that's talking about practices, procedures,
Yeah.
institutions, and systems. Like you can literally like
Yeah.
that's what I'm talking about. So when I
Yeah.
say structural analysis, that's the reason why I'm doing my fingers like this, giving you a
Yeah.
visual of saying a structural analysis makes it where you account for not only the system, but the people that's propping up the system that makes a structure. So when I'm talking analysis, I'm
Where
thinking
has that
about it
gotten
literally.
us?
You see what I'm saying?
Where has that gotten us in the last how many centuries? Structural analysis and
It's new. It's new. You don't.
all the literature and theory.
It's so new that you don't know what it is, and I'm having to tell you the difference
That
between
that,
structures and
that
institutions. So
no no
going
no.
back, so even was the debate, it's like
You
literally what I'm giving you is so unique
no
and
no no
so
hold on.
mystified, you don't know what I'm talking about.
But
Because
hold
even when
on.
you ask me, how
No
does
no
it
no no
add
no.
up? It's like you see
I'm
how
writing down.
you don't
I'm
even
writing
really
down.
understand it.
I'm writing down two things right now. The first one is I don't need you to explain systems where it's institutional. I use them synonymously because that's what
I'm not
people
see
use.
again.
But hold on. But
Structure.
hold
I said
on. But
systems
hold on.
institutions. That's a part
But
of the
hold on.
structure.
But hold on. What you just said about I'm talking about stuff so mystifying you don't even know it, that can't be the crux of your argument if the other person
It's not the
isn't
crux
even
of my
aware
argument.
of it. If the other person.
I'm giving you the crux of my argument is that we need to have a structural analysis, and I'm telling you that you cannot reduce a structural analysis to trusting the government. That's not what it is. You can't reduce the structural analysis to saying we don't care about individuals. That's not what it is.
Who
If there's a
controls the
structural
structures?
analysis, that's what I'm saying. The crux of my argument boils down to saying that we have to have a anti-black structural analysis of the world that takes into a part of practices, procedures, institutions, and systems.
Who
For you to be
controls
able
all
to
those?
do a structural analysis,
Who
you have to think
controls
about how people mobilize around practices, institutions, systems, and you
who
know what I'm saying?
controls
That's like a structural analysis.
who controls and dictates and influences institutions, practices, process, like it's governments. I mean, who's going
Who
to be
is the main
responsible?
who is through and through, whether through an intersectional understanding? When we talk about class, gender,
Who
ability,
caused this
sexuality,
problem?
who is the bottom of that hierarchy and who
No,
is
but
never forefront it?
who
Black
caused
people.
the who caused the problem in the first place? Governments. Who needs to fix it? Right?
It's
But how do we get
it's
governments
not
to fix
government.
it?
Like it's like think about it like this.
No, Conscious. Let me clarify one thing, Conscious.
It's bigger than that.
Let me just clarify one thing for you. Because I disagree with you doesn't mean I don't understand you. I don't think that the world operates in structures. That's not how budgets are allocated. That's not how votes happen. So what I'm saying is, I understand what you're saying about
So
processes
what
and
are structures
structure. No,
typically?
hold on.
What are you saying structures are though?
No. I understand what you're saying about structures and institutions, everything that fits into it. But what I'm talking about is that theory and all of the literature, when it comes down to it, who's going to be in charge of issuing reparations? It's governments, Conscious. We can't. The
So
world
why
isn't
don't we see
divided.
individuals?
The world's geographical boundaries aren't divided by this
Why focus
ethereal
on
structure.
individuals? So why
Because
focus on individuals?
because individuals make up society, and individuals have the ability to change governments. I mean, look at look at what's happening in Israel. Look at what's happening in what? No, you can't say no to government.
Individuals are governed or literally governed by the system. So they
And
literally
who?
conform to
But
what the
who?
system government says.
And who
Literally,
can change the
you
system?
were sent to school to be a citizen, a
Who can
government
change the
abiding
system?
citizen.
Who can change the system? Individuals. Nothing can happen without individuals, right?
This the
We can't.
reason. This the
This is the
reason. This
top.
the
This is
reason
the.
why you have to.
We're saying the same thing, bro. We're saying top down, bottom up, but it's just
That's not
different
the same
approaches.
thing though.
It is the same thing.
But that to me, that
What
isn't
you're?
part of the problem. The part of the problem is, do we do it from the top down or the bottom up? I'm saying top down. I mean bottom up. You saying top down?
No, I'm saying bottom up, and you're saying top down.
No, I'm saying a structural analysis
As the
requires us
top,
to do both of these
structures sit,
things.
structures sit over everything. So you're saying top down. What I'm saying is I want
Yeah, I think
individual
this. Yeah,
people to go bottom up. All I'm saying is that when I have conversations with people who aren't into theory or academics or anything,
but listen, no,
you
but
can't
this
well
the
hold on,
part
but
is
you can't
white
take this to them.
supremacy comes from literature and academia. It was white boys that sat around in an academic think tank and said that white people are
It's
superior. So
but it's
you
ironic.
earmark what I'm
No,
saying
no,
as
no,
being
no, no.
academic and theory is
But
irritating me right now.
it's
I'm telling you, you
it's
irritate me
ironic.
characterizing what I'm saying and doing as being merely academic research theory. Because what you're talking about, individualistic or white supremacy, that is also academic theory.
But what I'm saying is, you've throughout this conversation, you've been talking about literature, you've been citing doctors and academics. What I'm saying is that when this gets into the real conversations, when you talk to people who, hold on, let me finish. When you talk to, this isn't a political conversation, but when you talk to people who voted for Trump, or when you talk to people who voted for Brexit, or when you talk to people who are pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, right? When you're talking to everyday people, you can't talk in terms of the structures and the institutions and here's the literature. That doesn't resonate with people. I'm not at all here challenging literature I haven't read. What I'm saying is, when I have conversations with people, I need to give them actionable ways to make change, and I can't do that when I start talking about, well, anti-blackness and structures sit over that. I can't take people.
Problem
I
though is
can't
that we
take
have to.
people. I have to make it digestible for people. I have to tell people in one line
You can
how they can make a difference. And I can't do that through structures and analysis of institutions and all, because people don't resonate with that. It's confusing for people.
Yeah, but you suturing the desire for everybody to want to act. You know what I'm saying?
Means to an end. Means to an end, brother. What at the end of the
Means to
day,
an end for what
at
though?
the end of the day, we
Because
both
the
want
reason
equity. We both want equity. It means to the end. If that means that somebody gets it
the
through
question is
a
how do we get to the
well-reasoned,
equity though?
exactly. But if that means somebody gets there through a well-reasoned article versus an Instagram post that's colorful, I don't give a fuck how they get there. I want them to be
Yeah,
anti-black just like you do, but we just do it in different ways. But
yeah.
we're at the same goal, so let's hug it out.
Yeah. I mean, definitely hugging out. Definitely good. We good.
I love our chats. I love our
But
chats
listen though,
because
these
we come to
conversations
things
are
from so
important
different.
because
They
the
are.
disagreement has to be the
It
disagreements
has to be
have
had,
to
and
be
that's why I
had.
love it.
Not
That's why I
only
love
that
it.
though, it's not just the well, we just do it. It's like no, the reason why we had a disagreement because we were acknowledging there was a tension. You feel
Yeah.
me? So now we're trying to get to the tension. And what
So
started
what
our
can
tension
we?
is me introducing and saying that we should start thinking about this and characterizing it through anti-blackness, blackness. And you said,
Yeah.
no, I think it's better to talk about white supremacy. And the
Yeah.
reason why this is because I want to play back. The
I
reason
stand.
why.
No, I stand by it. Or we can watch the replay. We can watch the replay.
Yeah, but you and I right now. The reason why I brought it
Yeah,
back was because you said that I think that fissures solidarity basically, or that brings down coalitions. I'm like, whoa.
I do. I
You know
do.
what I'm
I
saying?
still think it does.
So
I still think it
that,
does.
but that is where the tension is. You feel me?
I
That
don't. I
that that
don't.
is
I
that
don't.
that is where that is where we started talking about what you started talking about and what I started talking about. Because the
Have
only
you seen
difference
event?
is
Have you
that
seen Avengers?
have I seen Avengers? Nah.
Oh, I was about to say with an Avengers analogy, we can't beat Thanos, white supremacy, if we're all not coming together. And I think we just have to figure out how do we get people
But
who are
anti-blackness is the mobilizing factor of white supremacy. You know
as a
what black
black
people
as
think
a
they want to
black
entertain of white
person,
supremacy? It's the
as a
anti-blackness. It's
as a
like
black
literally.
as a black person, I don't think framing it as anti-blackness is how we get the people we need to get on board. I just don't. I don't. That's
Yes,
not
and
my
I
experience
told
that
you
I've had with
why though.
people.
And I
No, I
told
know
you
you told
why.
me why,
You,
but
you you don't
you,
because of the grammars of suffering of black people, and you acknowledging that it is not digestible, it is not
yeah,
intelligible enough to mobilize people. And I'm telling you
yeah.
that is the problem. So
No,
what
no,
I'm
no.
saying
I
is that
agree.
even
That's the
like it's
problem.
we can let
No,
it
I
go.
hundred, I hundred, I hundred
The
percent.
problem.
I
It's
hundred
like
percent agree
literally it's
that
like
I 100% agree, but I think we go about solving it in different ways because I agree that
right, that's the
anti-blackness
problem.
isn't digestible, but in order to
Is
make it
that black
digestible,
suffering is not digestible, bro. Like they like at the end of the day, no matter how much you talk about white supremacy,
I
you
know, 100%.
have to come to terms with the idea around and the reality about how gratuitous violence to black people is not digestible. And
I
even
agree.
if we're
We're
able to
agreed.
mobilize people for white supremacy, what about the anti-blackness? And
I
that's not it's like not theoretical. It's like literally, what about niggas? That's basically all we're saying. Like, what
We
about niggas?
agree. What about
About
niggas?
niggas.
We what? Can we get a T-shirt made that says "What about niggas"? Please,
But
I will
I'm
co-sign
telling
that.
you right now though, because now my debate. So it's like we good. Like I'm a debater, so we still homies, but we definitely disagree 1,000%
Oh, oh,
on
look! I told you
what
this.
like we definitely
I
that's
told you this.
definitely like we
I
definitely
told you.
disagree.
I told you this last time. I used to do debate in
We
middle high school
good,
and
but
college, so we could have debates about this. All, but
yeah,
I love these conversations between us because
we
even
homies,
with
but we
this
disagree.
even with this conversation, we came into it today both being for reparations, but then we start talking about it in different ways. And I love these conversations because no matter who you are, you can get something from this.
No matter who you are.
Either somebody who it resonates anti-blackness or dismantling white supremacy doesn't matter. As long as we are
It's
all agreed that we need to
anti-blackness.
as long as we agree we need to tear down the current systems, then
Yeah.
we can be friends. So
We have to agree. We have to tear down the systems, but we got to recognize even doctors. You feel me? If you
yeah,
misdiagnose the sickness, you can fuck something up. You know what I'm
of
saying? So
course,
when it comes to us giving these analysis, I think
yeah,
that shit get real complex, and it's
yeah.
easy for us to I feel like be like, man, that's you know what I'm saying, whatever. You feel me? But
You
I
know
think
what's
that
not
doing that
no,
work is that's the ugly work we got to do because
you
like
know
the
what
way it is right now, it's not simple.
you know
It's
what's
ugly.
not you know what's not complex? Dismantle white supremacy. That's easy.
Even but you know, but even if I wanted to just throw my argument out about anti-blackness, you and I both know that, especially being in like a university context, when we start talking about what it means to tear down white supremacy, we still see that we still got to have black people be able to see and understand. You feel me? Because I know that I give an example. The University of Oklahoma, we had this white fraternity called SAE. Literally sung about hanging niggas from trees.
Mm.
You feel me? It was more chaos, in my opinion, amongst black people in terms of how we should respond than it needs to have didn't need to be at all. We had
Let me
some
ask
black
you.
people that was like we should sing. We
Let me
had
ask you
some
a
people that
question.
think we should go to administration. We had some
Let me
that
ask you.
like, so you know what I'm
Let
saying?
me ask you a question. When SAE sung that song, right? How many white women, how many gay, white homosexuals or white members of the LGBT community, how many Latinx people came to the defense? My argument is that when it's focused on just anti-blackness, other communities who have been marginalized don't feel a call to action. But when it becomes dismantle white supremacy, then they start to think, oh yeah, I could buy into it. That's my argument. And I'm curious to know who came to the defense of the black community at the University of Oklahoma. Was it just black people? Because that's an argument for
I don't.
changing the message.
I think that how you're framing anti-blackness is still making it where you think that it's. I feel like it's like I don't think you see what I'm getting at.
No, I see what you're getting at. I just disagree. But I see it.
But you're literally, but when I first introduced that term, you started
Yeah.
using it as a chain of equivalence and talking about anti-Asian hate and all this and anti-this. It's like, no, listen, I'm not.
But that's what's important.
I'm talking about how blackness, like,
but I think that's
like around the world. So
I think
to
that's
answer
what's
the question, we
important, though.
mobilized around anti-blackness. You see what I'm saying, though? That's
But
what
I think
this example came about, though.
But
we
I think
mobilized around resisting white supremacy. We mobilized around niggas being swung being swung about being from trees.
I think that's a perfect example, though,
the
of
anti-blackness
why.
possibility.
But I think it's a perfect example of why language matters. Because if I interpret anti-blackness as one thing, as an educated or someone who has had the privilege of going to an education, getting an education in an academic institution as a black person, if that resonates with me with a certain way and I interpret it a certain way, that means other people are going to interpret it in different ways. So it doesn't always matter what you meant when you said it. It often matters what people heard. And so even if when you say anti-blackness, you mean intersectional coalitions, it might not resonate with people, and that's all I'm saying is that I want to make sure whatever resonates with people.
I'm acknowledging too that white supremacy didn't at point. It was a point where white supremacy didn't resonate either. You feel me?
It's starting to now. It's starting to now.
Literally, you know, they do now because there's people that did the work to make it where they was resonating with them. You feel what I'm saying?
Black people did the work.
My point exactly. So
we agree. Don't worry.
Yeah, but
I'm with the blacks. I'm with the blacks. Don't worry.
The blackness should be the center of what we get to, because we still see how it was the death of a black person in Minneapolis that was able to mobilize the entire world. It was the notion of the anti-black violence, not the. You know what I'm saying? So we still see how we see, and we see now that what's undeniable is that the death of George Floyd had a unique impact on the world in a way that no other death hadn't. And I think it was because of how the anti-black death, how the black body was literally made erasure.
This is the last.
You know what I'm saying?
This is the last thing I'll say. This is the last thing I'll say is that I think when we think about Emmett Till, when we think about Rodney King and LA race riot, I think George Floyd. I mean, I'm not a parent of atrocities by any means, right? But, I mean, we all know this, right? What happened to George Floyd has happened many times before. It just wasn't caught on camera, right? When you think of Eric Gardner, etc. So I Can't Breathe was something that was in the public discourse years before for George Floyd. What I think was different is that we were in a pandemic where everything else was, there was nothing else to distract you, right?
Yeah,
there was no sports, there was nothing else. So I think that was the main thing. But when I'm talking about blackness, though, I think an interesting case, but I think there's an interesting case study here in the UK. But here in the UK, there's an interesting case study where there was a young girl named Sarah Everard. Sarah Everard, she was murdered by police here in the UK, here in London, and that got so much more media attention because she was white that people then started to say defund the police, or we need to look at the police. That would not have happened if she was black. That is why I hesitate to say that anti-blackness needs to be at the center of it. Not because I'm not for it, obviously, because as a black man I am for blackness being at the center. But what I worry is that when I live and exist in majority white places, I know that I haven't gotten far with the language of blackness at the center of anything. So I try to make it more palatable. It's for the same reasons as you. I try to put the pill in a cookie to give it to my dog versus you just open the throat and shove the pill down. Whatever works.
No, that's why I know we agree on, definitely. It's like different.
No, we do.
Like, at the end of the day, I know for a fact when it comes to like liberation, movement, you know what I'm saying, progression, I'm acknowledged every day of the week that everybody can't be at the front door. Everybody can't be at the back door. You know what I'm saying? Everybody can't be knocking. Somebody, you know what I'm saying? It's like in my mind, if you're trying to take down a home or you're trying to get inside, you need a lot of people doing a lot of different things. Or when I think about how America was structured and built, you got to account for the missionaries, the evangelicals, this industry, that industry,
Can you
the
define
academics. You know what I'm
structure for
saying?
me? Can you define structure for me?
Policies,
No.
procedures.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm
I'm about to
kidding.
give it to you again. It's like, hey,
Yo.
for the people that's watching this, I don't know if people know, I'm ranked in the top 20 of debate for the military for a reason. You feel me?
He said, let me self promo right now.
Let me just so the way my mind works is because I've been trained to think about it through a policy debate standpoint. And
But
I'm
does that always translate when you're
looking
talking
up
to
different
people?
ways to bring up to like, what about
But
this?
does
What about that? It's like,
but
hey,
does that always translate to people who aren't as academic as you, Conscious? Do you
always
sometimes?
for me, like this is how I built my following. I built
Yeah.
my following, my portable skills of debate. The reason why people like me is because I'm a nigga that debated, that can use words that the world don't think niggas like me should be able to use, bro. If you keep it a stack, if you keep it real, and I think that the way that I think about things is because of what I went through in debate, being a nigga from around College Station, Texas. You know what I'm saying? Had to debate against Harvard and USC and UT. It's like I'm having to debate against them, talking about what I'm talking about. So everything you bringing up is shit they didn't say. You feel me? So I'm thinking like, here you go. And it's
So are you comparing me to the white elitists?
Nah, I'm saying that I am comparing your arguments to the white elitists. I'm attacking the argument and not the debater. I'm attacking the argument and not the debater. I am saying that the way that ideologically you come to understand whiteness and blackness, it is very similar to the white elites. I'm attacking the argument and not the
Well,
debater, bro.
that's why they call me the white whisperer,
Hey,
because
that's why they call you the white whisperer.
I can
But
get
what I'm
through.
saying is at a certain point of time, we have to say fuck code switching and give it to them raw. Because what we recognize is that that's what if we're being real, that's what we was debating about. We was
That's the
debating about
ideal. That's the ideal.
marketability. That's what we was debating about. We was debating
That's
about
the
code
ideal.
switching, marketability, and how one can be understood in terms of
That
making it where people in power feel like they can do something about it. And
that
what
is
I'm
the
saying in
ideal.
the legal economy, boy, shout out to
That
my
is the
debate people.
that is the ideal. But in my lifetime, I mean, I'm a stand-up comic, so when I do my stand-up comedy, I get very real. I talk about race, all these issues. But in my lifetime, I don't have an expectation that I'll be able to walk into a white-dominated or corporate space without code switching, and that's just the reality
Yeah.
of the world. I mean, you can't get rid of 4 centuries
50 Cent
plus.
them shoulders though, fam. 50 Cent them
No, but
shoulders, bro.
four
I mean,
centuries plus of these issues, and you think they're going to go away in our lifetime? No way. It's going to take generations for us to get
yeah.
to a point where I don't have to code switch when I go
I can
into a
dig it
meeting.
though. I can dig it,
Yo,
fam.
this was good. Make sure you save this on your page so I can download it and put it on mine as
What I'm
well.
gonna do is I'm gonna be saving it and putting it on my YouTube page. Cause I got
Okay.
some structure with some strategic things going on Instagram right now. So
Oh,
y'all want
okay.
to catch this conversation? It'll be on YouTube.
Well, I want a copy too
Yeah,
for
I'll
my
give you a copy.
followers because I'm not doing all the structure or
Yeah, I'm gonna
whatever.
send you a copy. I can send you a
Okay.
copy.
Okay, good. Send it to me in this format so I can just upload it on for IG, yeah? All right, good. All right, Conscious, we'll do this again soon. I know we have a whole host of topics to talk about, so I'll catch you soon.
All right, man.
All right, bet.